Hello everyone, and welcome to video number 6, when we're going to learn about some of the first land animals. In the popular media, when it comes to covering evolution, often the first creatures on land are described as tetrapods, as vertebrates, as creatures with 4 legs that ultimately evolved to become reptiles, you and me, birds, and other creatures like that. So it may surprise you to learn that these were actually, by quite a long way, not the first animals on land. Rather, they're relatively late onto the surface of the Earth compared to what did come first, which were actually arthropods. Now, we've covered arthropods elsewhere in this course. If you want to remind yourself of what an arthropod is, go to video number 5 of macroevolution. But if you look at the tree of arthropods that I've put on this slide here, you can see that there are 3 major groups of arthropods that have moved onto land. There are the chelicerates, so arachnids are terrestrial organisms that are member of this lineage, the chelicerates. So I'm talking spiders, mites, scorpions, things like that. There are the myriapods, millipedes and centipedes and their kin, and there are the hexapods, that's the group that includes the insects. And all of these, as implied by the fact that we have an aquatic trilobite in this tree here and an aquatic crustacean in this tree here, must have, based on this tree topology, this tree shape, they must have terrestrialized separately from each other. So each one of these is a separate instance of terrestrialization within the arthropods, and all 3 of those, I can tell you, had moved onto land before the first vertebrates came along. Actually, resolving this tree, as we learnt in that macroevolution video, has been really challenging, and that's because all of those 3 lineages that have moved onto land have highly convergent traits to reflect that mode of life on land. So many of the problems in arthropod phylogeny, arthropod relationships, can be traced back to this fact that these 3 are evolving in parallel on as terrestrial organisms. So when it comes to the first land animal, these terrestrial arthropods were the first animals to come onto land. Let's talk now about when that likely happened. So the first actual evidence we have of animal life on land comes in the form of temporary incursions by arthropods into coastal environments, which predated the establishment of land ecosystems. So these are recorded most notably by trackways that are shown in black and white on the left-hand side in the middle of this slide here. These are trackways that were found in a coastal setting that are middle to late Cambrian in age. So these kind of tracks start appearing globally from about 510 million years onwards. And it seems like these represent a community of arthropods that inhabit both aquatic marine environments, but sometimes could just pop onto land every now and then and inhabit dry and damp marine marginal settings. It's also thought that these animals may be examples of stem group myriapods. In fact, specifically, it's been suggested that tracks such as these were made by euthocarcinoids. If you want to learn more about this interesting group of animals, this paper from Edgecombe et al. 2020 on the slide is a really good introduction. And we get these kind of trackways from the Cambrian through the early Ordovician. Some Ordovician examples from the UK are shown on the right-hand side here. And we are building up a picture of marine organisms that penetrate upstream environments in marginal marine settings, but there are no unequivocally land-based faunas documented even into the middle Ordovician period. So there seems to be a bit of a gap in the fossil record. As with the plants, we can use molecular clocks to estimate the origin of terrestrial clades of animals. And so the molecular clocks in this case support an origin for terrestrial chelicerates and also myriapods at around this time in the late Cambrian period. So this diagram here shows an arachnid tree on the left-hand side and a myriapod tree on the right-hand side. The Cambrian period is marked in green on both of these, and this star in both trees represents the node, the point at which, based on this tree shape at least, these organisms, these animals, moved on to living in land. Both in both cases, that places terrestrialization in these groups in the late Cambrian. Now, sadly, the fossil record doesn't really support that. There's a shortage of deposits with exceptional preservation that sample land animals from basically the Cambrian and the Ordovician through the Silurian as well. And so we know that we're missing a lot of potential rocks. And I should also highlight that what these trees mean is actually the tree shape has a very large impact for terrestrialization. And in particular, in the arachnids shown on the left-hand side here, this is a tree that suggests that all land-based, so terrestrial chelicerates, which are the arachnids, are a monophyletic group. They have a common point of origin here in the Cambrian. That's highly debated. If you want to learn more about it, it gets quite complicated. Please do feel free to ask me in person sometime, and I can happily give you the latest. But there are alternative tree shapes in play, which suggests that there could be more than one terrestrialization in the arachnids as a whole, and obviously that will affect the timings that are shown on this tree here. So there's lots of research still to be done about the terrestrialization of animal groups. What we do know is that in the Ordovician we have a relatively complete trace fossil record that samples a range of land environments that suggest increasingly common incursions into land environments. So that's what's shown on this graph on the left-hand side here. We can see that we have what we're relatively confident may be millipede trackways, so that's actual millipedes, as in a subgroup of the myriapods more generally, from the late Ordovician onwards. And as you can see from the rest of these bars, which are actual body fossils, we've got evidence of land animals that appear just after the first Cooksonia fossils. Exactly what order these fossils are placed is a bit up in the air as well, I'm afraid. So for a long time, we've considered the earliest land animals to be the millipedes shown on the right-hand side here. So this is a fossil millipede. It's from Stonehaven in Scotland, and it's a fossil which has things called spiracles. We've met those already in the video about adaptations for life on land that suggests that it definitely breathed air. The reason that we don't know whether that's the oldest fossil or not is that there has been a recent debate about how old the rocks it's found in actually are. Some radiometric dates have suggested that it may be somewhere around 415 million years old. A more recent paper from Wellman et al. I've put on the slide here suggests that these rocks may actually be 430 million years old based on different forms of evidence. And in fact, there's been another paper from 2025 where the first radiometric team has provided an alternative date. So this debate is ongoing. So this millipede, depending upon how old the rocks it's found in actually are, may be our first land body fossil. If it's not, that kind of badge, that kind of honor falls to a member of the arachnids. At the middle top here is a 435 million year old example of a fossil scorpion. So that is definitely a member of the arachnids. However, we have a separate problem here in that we think that some scorpions were probably aquatic. And so whether this scorpion that's shown here, 435 million years old, is a land animal is actually open to debate. And so that leaves us with this fossil here, which is about 420 million years old, is a member of a group of wholly land-based arachnids, the trigonotarbids, and so that could be our first land animal, depending on the age of the millipede and the exact environment in which the scorpion lived. So basically, we have a lot of sampling bias. We don't have many rocks that can give us fossils from the Ordovician, and we really start picking up in very rapid succession a whole host of different land animals from the late Silurian onwards. So take that for what it's worth. But what I can tell you is that by the time of the Rhynie Chert, by 411 million years ago, the major arthropod clades that we find on land are present. So you can see examples on this slide here of hexapods and possible insects from the Rhynie Chert, an arachnid. This is actually a mite shown on the right-hand side here. This is the leg of a centipede, so that's a myriapod. And I just put in for fun, it's not an arthropod, but actually this is a nematode worm that was clearly around by the time that the Rhynie chert was deposited 411 million years ago. So we very quickly, after those first land fossils appear, body fossils, have a fairly a community with a makeup that isn't too dissimilar from what we have today on land, really, in terms of the broader groupings that we see there. So the Rhynie chart is very, very useful in that regard for giving us these minimum dates by which these groups had made it onto land. So that is the state of animal life on land. And as time ticks along and then we move through the Devonian, things start to change in terms of the land ecosystems as a whole. As we move through the Devonian, the fossil record of plants gets much more complete with hundreds of known sites globally, and the plants get more and more diverse and much bigger. A really good illustration of this is a series of fossils from Gilboa in New York State that were deposited at around 380 million years ago. This is actually a famous fossil forest, and this demonstrates unequivocally that by 380 million years ago, a tree habit had evolved within the plants. So trees as a whole have actually, they're not a kind of a monophyletic group. Lots and lots of different kinds of plants evolve into a tree-like form. We could call it the tree habit, which has evolved multiple times. And these are fossils showing the base of some of these trees on the left-hand side here. Well, I should say this is a fossil showing the base of a tree from Gilboa on the left at 380 million years. And this is actually a map of a bedding plane of the Gilboa fossil forest, showing a variety of different species coexisting in this fossil forest at 380 million years ago. So we've got a relatively complex forest ecosystem relatively shortly, really, after the appearance of plants on land. And by the Middle Devonian, we can say for sure that the tree habit had evolved in several major plant groupings. The evolution of a robust vascular system within plants has allowed this, along with the evolution of woody tissue. So both of those are prerequisites for trees to form. And that's probably driven by evolutionary pressures to reach greater heights, to allow access to more sunlight for photosynthesis and to facilitate better spore distribution. So we very quickly have these forests, and trees are really good examples of what we may call ecosystem engineers. They create environments upon which, say, beautiful arthropods, animals can live. And so the evolution of these forests then allowed the evolution of other, we think, or the diversification of other groups of land organisms. Now, this is important, not just because trees form forests and forests are today really important habitats globally, but because they have an impact on the entire Earth system. So there's an impact from the evolution of plants and their rooting systems on the Earth's sedimentary cycles and thus on its geology. To help illustrate that, let's look at these pictures of rivers here. On the left-hand side, you can see an example of a typical meandering river. This is the Mississippi, for what it's worth, and you see that you've got one main channel with lots of, which are switched every now and then, with lots of abandoned oxbows, etc., oxbow lakes, etc. But most of the water is carried through that main channel. In contrast, on the right-hand side, you can see an example from Iceland of a braided river system where actually you get more sheet-like flow through multiple channels. So this is a spectrum of river morphology that you find on Earth today. And I can tell you, and this is summarized by the diagram you can see on this slide here, that before plants, sediments on land were typically more sandstone rich. Rivers were typically more towards the braided end of the spectrum. So meandering streams can arise in the absence of land plants, but it looks like plants provided widespread settings that allowed stable meandering systems to become far more common once they had evolved. And this is because dense rooting systems allow the retention of floodplain mud. They provide a kind of a function of sediment baffling. They trap sediment, slowing flow down, and they mechanically strengthen channel banks, allowing, as is shown on this diagram, as they evolve through time, increasingly familiar river morphologies to evolve to the point where, by the Permian, they are far more similar to what we typically see today. And that means that the evolution of plants from these tiny things in the Silurian through to the Permian has had a quite significant change on the sediments we see deposited on land, and thus have impacted the geology of Earth. So I think it's worth highlighting the impact that has. For more information on that, see this really excellent review from 2022 that gives you a nice overview. And with that, I'll move on to video number 7, where we'll look at the origin of vertebrates on land. So I'll see you there very, very shortly.